the floor to Frank, who will be giving us his presentation. Frank.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And I'm just going to bring up my slide. Okay. Sorry. Somehow left. Okay, that's on. I'm hoping that you can see my presentations just come up now. Okay, let's make a start. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining in this morning, and thank you very much, Jamie, Petra, and others from IDS for making this possible and actually helping to get this edition of the booklet on post-emergency and fragile state settings going. It's been a great journey, and I've learnt a lot from you guys, and I'm very grateful. Just to give you a bit of an agenda here, I'm going to go through, in a sense, why the interest. Why did I put this booklet together in the first place? Then to look at some key learning points, and then, as Jamie said, following that, a sort of Q&A, informal time of being able to ask questions. Unfortunately, we can't do that by voice. It'll have to be written, and Jamie will pass the questions to me. But I'm rather hoping that we can also, in that modality, pose questions where, if everybody can see the question, other people can answer as well. But so first of all, let me explain why the interest and why I put this booklet together. It actually started as a paper a few years back, quite some years back, as a sort of offshoot of the Global WASH Cluster, coming out of the Hygiene Promotion Forum, begun by Oxfam. So it has its genesis some years ago. There was significant enthusiasm and success we've seen in introducing CLTS in Afghanistan in 2009. Of course, a fragile and conflict-affected state context, if ever there was one, at that time. And perhaps the stage was ripe, the timing was just absolutely right for CLTS to be introduced, and that incidentally was done through IRSP from Pakistan, and it really caught on. So we were encouraged by that, and we've also seen success in Liberia and DR Congo. And so Tearfund, we became convinced of its applicability beyond the non-fragile development context. We also linked growing evidence of the appropriateness generally of what we call demand-led WASH approaches in fragile states and host community context, of which CLTS is an example. So we hold that demand-led approaches, which would also include approaches such as FAST and water safety plans and demonstration and champion of models, better ensure sustainability and replicability of WASH access throughout the relief to development continuum. And then we later learned of some agencies, for example Oxfam and UNICEF, adapting CLTS successfully even in camp settings, and we'll look at those examples presently. So let me take you on to the first slide. So the aim of this webinar was really to relate some of the key learning points. Once we were convinced, we were gathering these case studies and had our own to show and to learn from. Also exploring generally then how, when, and in what circumstances can a CLTS style process of analysis and action and collective behavior change be undertaken. We're working at cut-in. What I'd like to do, or what I did in the booklet, which incidentally will be available to download following this presentation from the CLTS website. But I've grouped the learning in one of three what we call situation typologies. Displaced people living in camps, displaced people living in host communities, and then the most popular, people living in settled villages in conflict-affected areas, perhaps still undergoing recovery rehabilitation, and perhaps where retainees are still coming in as well. So let's begin in the displaced people living in camp situation. And the first example is from Oxfam GB's example in Hyderabad, Pakistan in 2010, following the floods there. So this is about displaced people living in camps, and I've worked with Sonia Sagan on this example. Tented camps resulting from flooding and the displacement, and quite a challenge here early on, seeing that there was a lot of different people groups, various ethnic backgrounds, I think 12 different tribes really in this situation in the camps, and consequently Sonia writes in her example of a low level of cohesion. Many latrines in the camps were not being used or properly maintained, and one reason of that being the long distances that some people had to walk to reach latrines. Now, there were 9 separate community groups that actually took part in CLTS triggering, and the triggering was fairly classical: defecation walk, the fly food transfer, mapping, and so on. But only 4 of the 9 groups went on to create an action plan and a daily cleanup campaign, OD patrols, and cleaning on recreational areas and so on. Let's look at the learning that I've sort of grouped here. In the booklet, by the way, what I've done is I've not put learning under each case study, but under the typologies: displaced people living in camps, host communities, and the third one. So I'm just doing a one-by-one quick learning points here. It seems to go better when we've got the photographs in front of us. So we see that prioritizing CLTS or CATS in the UNICEF sense is in sites where sanitation already exists. Was an obvious thing. It was really key. CLTS found to be most effective actually in keeping the environment clean rather than building new toilets. Keeping a clean environment, safe areas, no OD in the camp area. That was really the outcome and the aim of the campaign, rather than building new toilets. Definitely, Sonia talks about an emphasis on the quality of facilitation made a more difference. Success could be attributed to that more than the physical conditions around. So very well facilitated triggering activities directly address the issue of poor use of existing latrines. I think they saw this because certainly one of the facilitators was a very dynamic person, good communicator, actually had a musical background, the sort of singing, dancing type, and really took those community groups on. So that was a very key point of learning there. Okay, let's go to another example of displaced people living in camps, and this was from Fiorella Polo and back in 2010 in Haiti, which many of you would have been part of, I'm sure. So in this context, again, in camps where sanitation facilities already existed, so the focus was on the resident community taking ownership of cleaning and maintenance and the proper use of toilets. Now, many toilets were dismantled and materials used for construction purposes around the home. So in camps where no or insufficient sanitation facilities existed, the community did build latrines and promoted their use. So just summarizing some of the learning here then, just come up on the screen. So CATS work well where improved sanitation already exists, similar to the Oxfam example, spurring people on to take responsibility of this cleaning and maintenance tasks, and for the proper take-up of latrines that were there in the first place. And of course, to reduce likelihood of latrines being dismantled, ensure adequacy of family shelters, this was happening. You know, if your shelter is rudimentary, you're going to be dismantling or taking parts from a latrine that would be otherwise gifted, that would be sitting there. So this was a key learning point, ensuring the adequacy of family shelters at the same time. Again, as with Oxfam, the success of triggering being more dependent on the quality of facilitation than even the physical criteria. And the fourth and very important learning point here is to, Fiorella emphasizes avoiding facilitating a CLTS campaign alongside other supply-driven projects, whether or not they're WASH, so that you've got that focus on self-help and that movement along the development R2D continuum. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the second sort of category of displaced people living in host communities. Now I've just got one example of this, and there's this example in the booklet at the moment, and it's from Sudan. And let me go back there. So in this context, we have CATS was rolled out within the context of a total sanitation policy held by the government of Sudan anyway. What's important about this is that it is actually a total sanitation approach and includes sufficiency of water access, cleanliness of water points and storage, use of latrines by all family members, and really importantly, emphasis on the availability of low-cost latrine options. I think this latter point's really key. So Wes really were focusing on giving a strong emphasis on no hardware subsidy and on the availability of local solutions and materials. Religious teachings, this is a Muslim context of course, were important and used to support the promotion of ODF. And a community action plan was agreed, but that action plan, like I said, within the context of a total sanitation approach, including things not just like sanitary inspection, but also water quality testing, IEC materials, particularly on home-based treatment, provision of chlorine tabs, and then filters for purchase. And another key learning point here is the use of demonstration latrines, so that people could see and aspire to copying something that they saw. So here's that learning summarized coming up. This total sanitation context was the context predominant there in Sudan, and Wes would then focus on embedding the CLTS process in this wider program of self-improved, non-subsidized WASH facilitation, and reducing expectancy on general hardware donations. Supporting livelihoods, we're going to see this later come up often, capacity building of local artisans and service providers, and again something else which comes up another context, a strong use of local religious leaders to disseminate messages of cleanliness and well-being. So that's that category, and I'm going to move on now to what I've got most, what the booklet has most case studies around, which is people living in settled villages in conflict-affected areas or undergoing recovery rehabilitation themselves. Now my first example is from Afghanistan, and as I said at the beginning, this is where in Tearfund we got most of our where we sort of began our learning and saw success. A lot of it, yeah, because it was ripe and it coming from Bangladesh, Pakistan, where CLTS began. There were a lot of similarities in culture, that for sure. But still, we learnt a lot, we felt, about this particular fragile context. So CLTS was part of an overall demand-led, livelihoods-based integrated WASH program in this context. It was itself incorporated to establish awareness of the link between OD and diarrheal disease in order to stimulate a demand for safe sanitation. And following successful triggering events, construction of latrine was left to households and local tradesmen, with Tearfund focusing its efforts on facilitation, promotion, marketing and training. So really a strong social marketing or sanitation marketing approach here. So there's that learning, that construction of latrines left to homeowners, local masons, and as Tearfund providing training and also help in latrine siting. Our early attempts at water safety plans fed into this. So, for example, people making sure that their vault latrines were well sealed, particularly in sort of mountainous areas with steep thin soils and steep slopes and so on. So latrine siting was really important, and that we fed into that. After the CLTS triggering, and once the communities had started work on their action plans, we facilitated a community FAST process. Yep, yeah, you heard it, and I know that there's been a lot of discussion on, you know, FAST vis-a-vis CLTS, and actually I've got I give some scope to this, to explaining the differences and the different genesis of both approaches in the booklet. So to emphasize in this context, what we did was CLTS to create the sanitation demand, and later facilitating a community FAST process, not sort of classical, but taking many components of FAST to emphasize the importance of good hygiene, particularly hand washing with soap. And this stimulated the demand for hand washing facilities. You can see this in this current slide now. And this particular, so the FAST approach in following some months actually, following CLTS, got local artisans, particularly local steel workers, making these hand washing devices, and increased the demand for soap as well, met by local shop owners. So again, continuing that strong sanitation marketing emphasis. So this resulted in the majority of households installing a hand washing facility outside of each latrine, and the demand for these facilities, as I said, led by in this case the steel workers. So summarizing the learning here, so as I said, similar to West in Sudan, embedding the CLTS process in a wider program of improved wash access based on demand-led livelihoods approach. That was key. Making use of these local religious leaders and the influence and opportunities they've got in bringing the messages of cleanliness and well-being to their community. Now, as most of you will know, as Tearfund, our preferred method of working, particularly in the development context, is through faith-based agencies. We ourselves are a Christian agency, and we certainly see faith-based agencies, not just the church, but Hindu and Muslim communities and the faith-based centres and leaders having real credence in bringing messages of well-being and cleanliness. It really ties in with a demand-led, self-reflective approach like CLTS. So that was really important to us. And involving leaders in advocating to government as well for replication of the process, and even, as in the case of Afghanistan, helping to secure subsequent policy change. So from 2010 onwards, the concept of open defecation free environments was part of the Afghan policy, with the help of other agencies as well, of course, but we certainly feel that was fed into by this process. And then, as I've mentioned before, post-triggering and once latrine construction was in progress, FAST used to consolidate hand washing practice. I'm going to move on now to a really inspiring case study which quite recent, 2014, by Nancy Balfour and Philippa Tenio and a couple of others, experience from Somalia and South Sudan. Now, this is available as a paper, and what I've done with permission and help from Nancy is to sort of condense this and draw out the key learning points which sort of help in us understand the sustainability elements of bringing CLTS into these contexts. So let me just first of all explain that the experience of the authors in both places was that there's a high cost, as we're all aware, high cost of constructing improved latrines in places like South Sudan, Somalia, due to logistical difficulties in transporting, construction materials to these remote locations on poor roads, traveling through insecure areas. So the whole logistical nightmare of getting a construction-based or supply-driven sanitation program on the road helps to think there must be a better alternative. Now, in South Sudan, after this sort of peace agreement 2006, the pilots for CLTS took some persuasion of the government, because they maintained that the communities were still very fragile, clearly after prolonged war, which had created poverty and dependency, and it was therefore difficult to see how people would support a non-subsidy approach to household sanitation. Now, through various national state level workshops, eventually the government was persuaded to allow various pilots. It was an ambitious program as a pilot program, perhaps over-ambitious actually, to begin with. 300 villages in 6 months being attempted to be triggered. It actually resulted in quite a few failures due to insufficient resources for follow-up, overlap with subsidized sanitation projects, and invariably in these contexts a lot of population movement as well. So the decision was taken only to promote CLTS in areas that had the most favorable conditions and where capacity for effective follow-up existed. So we're talking about stable soils, homogeneous culture, predominantly rural settlements and sedentary lifestyles, and a secure land tenure as well. These were important. Carried on facing, of course, the challenge of mobility due to fighting and drought. And so it was very key in this context to identify natural leaders. In Somalia, the program had triggered more than 370 villages, with 140 of them self-declaring ODF by August 2014. So that was a rapid scale-up. And one of the main successes has been the training of more than 120 NGOs as implementers, including putting a lot of focus on nutrition and health partners through the existing community health worker program. In fact, that was seen as a big plus in Somalia, the fact that community health workers already had a high acceptance in the communities. They were usually involved in curative work, so there was a lot of relearning to do a self-reflective program like a CLTS campaign, but a lot of respect and acceptance of the CHW's role. So the WASH program has leveraged that support, their support for the CLTS initiative. So the focus was on local NGOs as implementing partners, because of their ability to access communities even in the conflict-affected areas. And there was also evidence of direct village-to-village influence. Some villages have even been triggered this way. Now, this was important in a very important dynamic in Al-Shabaab controlled areas where access by implementing agencies is difficult anyway. So here's the learning summarized. That we would say, the group would say a phased scale-up can be more successful than rapidly going to scale. launch in areas that are accessible, with a plan for expansion to more difficult areas once the approach is well established. Give ourselves a good start in areas where CLTS is new. This idea of partnering with local NGOs, really important in Somalia, using their facilitation skills and mobility, and supporting natural leaders where access for NGOs and UN and government was limited. And this business as well of working alongside community health volunteers. Institutional triggering really important in South Sudan, particularly convincing government, working with leaders to say, you know, this is how CLTS could work. Let's look at pilots, look at favourable areas, and getting decision makers on board. Okay, moving now to a final example of work in as a result of the earthquake in April 2015 in Nepal, and this is really we're of course still learning here a lot on this approach, but generally most of you will know that the government of Nepal already had established a strong lead in total sanitation even before the earthquake actually. So it was so keen not to undermine the ODF achievements that had been reached and the community acceptance already of non-subsidized approach. And so those of you who were in the operations would remember that, you know, they didn't really they didn't tolerate implementing agencies trying to re-trigger or to sort of redo CLTS from the start. So here there's a context then of an ODF and a successful ODF situation before the emergency even began. Now, just before I go on, I'd like to give awareness to a paper by Richard Luff and also Prasad Sevakari. I presume Richard and Prasad are online, but it's a paper that's going to come out in Waterlines, probably the next edition, I should think. So they've expanded this work, this understanding of working on regaining the ODF status after an emergency in a place where total sanitation, good latrine use was already established. Now the thing here where particularly Tearfund and eventually the Global Bosch Cluster sort of fed in was, you know, seeing the fact that people had just lost everything in a moment, their homes and their latrines with the homes, and really the example is around convincing government, decision makers to enable a subsidy, a set subsidy of helping to build back latrines with the house building. No need to re-trigger from the start. Everybody wanted their latrines in any case. They valued that. I remember visiting the communities and sitting on the rubble and hearing the leaders saying, you know, in their language, of course, you know, we used to be ODF. Now look at us, you know. And this is an isolated community on a mountaintop, and you think, wow, these people have been there. It's not about re-triggering, it's about enabling them to build back. And actually, this term build back better as well. So eventually, through a lot of negotiation, being able to win, at least at district level, a sort of okay, bit of a toleration to say, yeah, bring on a subsidy to help our people rebuild their homes and latrines concurrently, and incidentally, whilst that was happening, we also did emergency latrines for that temporary reconstruction period. But that was really the way forward. So finally persuading government of Nepal to emphasize support for more disaster resilient construction as well, and agreeing to work within existing government of Nepal approved WASH structures. So here's that learning summarized, what I've just said there about working with government, giving strong collaboration and joint advocacy by WASH agencies holding the same vision for rehabilitation. And this idea of subsidy towards sanitation may be appropriate in this context where there's already a high ownership and usage of latrines prior to the natural disaster, and focusing as well on achieving more resilient shelter and sanitation facilities by working with artisans and home builders on building back better. So like I said, I also would encourage folk to have a look at Richard and Prasad's forthcoming article in Waterlines. Okay, let me now then just end on my last couple of slides. So what about ongoing challenges here? You know, the usual issue on subsidies, and the suggestion that perhaps from this learning and from other inputs, and these points on this slide particularly being prompted by Robert Chambers. I'm thankful to Robert, so these appear in the booklet. And a suggestion that perhaps we're moving subtly and should encourage moving towards smart targeted subsidies, for example vouchers and rebates, and then integrating financing strategies into programming various modalities. That's something that we should look into and apply that to CLTS in the Relief to Development continuum here. The question is, again, as always, how to deal with concurring supply-driven projects which can undermine the behaviour change process, and really importantly, how to influence donors, aid response donors. How do we sort of make that shift of getting donors to appreciate that? There's evidence, there's a lot of evidence now of these self-reflective, demand-led processes having a real effect on proper sanitation take-up, safe sanitation take-up. So yeah, let's influence those donors to give us more scope in our proposal indicators and outputs and outcomes. Capacity and land issues, big issue, the land tenure problem, uncertain, and we know this well, don't we, where landowners don't want to see anything but temporary sanitation facilities. So how to press into this and make this work with us to see, excuse me, CLTS and similar processes applicable in this context. And then finally, excuse me, future work, further evidence. I've just put up 3 subtitles here. These are all areas that we're looking into now in Tearfund in our future WASH strategy. So cash programming, especially after the important announcements of Ban Ki-moon, was back in March, who basically was saying, look, cash programming, this has got to be the base level. You know, consider it, and then consider why it won't be done, rather than later on just thinking of cash programming as a tag-on. So cash programming potentially we see as good linkage, certainly to the sanitation marketing, getting on the sanitation ladder principle, but of course at the same time it can actually undermine perhaps the hardware subsidy issue, mimicking hardware subsidy almost. So this is a challenge. But cash programming is coming, it's here, and how do we work that into CLTS? Payment by results, many of you will know, well, some of you will be involved, Plan and World Vision and ourselves Tearfund with Oxfam on quite large payment by results programs. For Tearfund, this is in Congo and Kenya. So the negative side, perhaps, this focus on payment qualifying outputs, if it's seen that way. Yeah, we want to get paid, you don't produce them, you don't get paid. So if you take that pragmatically, it could be a negative. It is a negative. But on the positive side, what we've certainly seen and we've wrestled with, and I think it's a real light at the end of the tunnel here, are the greater efforts placed on defining and achieving sustainable outcomes. And there's payment attached as well on that in our payment by results contract with DFID. So again, payment by results, a modality that we're going to see more of. So let's work with that and see how that can work and support CLTS. And then finally, seeing a lot more multi-sectoral approaches, water supplies, food security, conflict, nutrition, and it's appropriate. Well, many needs must be met, we know that. But the fear that will sanitation still remain the poor cousin that was evident, particularly in the early years of the MDGs. That's what we don't want to see. So how do we approach these multi-sectoral approaches, especially as part of the SDGs, whereby sanitation takes a top line, a good profile, and not a backseat? Good. I think that's more than 20 minutes for certain. I'm so sorry, and I hope I've left time for questions. So I'm going to diminish the my slides. Oops. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Frank. If you wanted to keep the final slide on, it would be good to see while we're discussing, if possible.
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
So, as we mentioned, if you wanted to ask questions, there is a question box, and I'll be bringing them together and feeding them to Frank. There are a number of comments coming in. I will start with the questions, and then towards the end I'll try to read out some of the comments which have been said. Before I start the questions to Frank, I'd just like to point out that the paper he referred to is currently out now. It came out in April 2016, and it's called Rebuilding Household Toilets After the Nepal Earthquake, an Emergency or an Interruption to Development, and it can be found in Waterlines, and you can look it up on their website, just to clarify. So,
good, thank you.
No, it's okay. So we have a number of questions coming through. A lot of the questions are questions which CLTS practice more generally is grappling with. So I'm not expecting, I don't think we should expect that some of the questions are unanswerable at this stage, unfortunately, but we'll see what we can do. So firstly, Frank, we've had a question on how can we manage the tension between supply and demand approaches. This is especially true in contexts where there is a core principle that hardware must be subsidized to ensure urgent needs are met.
Yeah, yeah, very good question, and I think a lot of more work and piloting needs to be done on how we move from a campaign post-triggering towards a longer-term view and a sanitation marketing envelope in which that can thrive. I certainly believe you don't just do a CLTS campaign and you trigger and then you start thinking about sanitation marketing. It's not about that, is it? It's about understanding the community and knowing its availability of materials, its skill base, its experience, its building techniques, and putting a budget towards training local artisans, perhaps youth groups, women's groups, and getting supply going. In a sense, I don't know, and I've not got a great deal of experience from this. I'm speaking more from things that we've seen, for example, working with women's groups in Tanzania and so on. But it's this idea of supply balancing demand. And I think one of the dangers here is that either supply or demand it does not match. So I think one of the false ideas in this particular theme is that the natural leaders are the ones who are going to be forwarding, be forward, be the shakers, movers on actual production. They're going to become the artisans and so on. That's not the case. I think people are saying in what I've read. I think we need to be formative in programming, in looking at artisans and getting a sort of service delivery capability, thinking even of Sanimarts and so on, where we're matching supply and demand. But look, I can't unfortunately give you an example within a fragile states context on this, and I would love to hear from other people of their experience of moving CLTS or CATS into this into the sort of marketing field where it's self-generative. We've certainly seen in Tearfund seen a lot of success in sanitation marketing. For example, with the biosan filter in places like Liberia and Ethiopia, and a particular focus there for us has been using, again, our distinctive people in the church who have already been involved in messaging, but people then building and providing biosan filters and actually having a long-term follow-up campaign, follow-up program as well, years after Tearfund stopped financially supporting the program, by the way, where they're actually renewing filters, helping families to sort of get going, choosing the right gravel, sand and so on. So that works well. So that's, I need to know more about how it fits in with CLTS, and if people can sort of add to that, this subject, that will be great learning for us all.
Do you have any examples or advice on how to get post-emergency supply-driven latrine construction by some agencies stopped at the right time so one is able to get on with the demand-led approach? Just to clarify what the question.
Jamie, I'm afraid I don't. Okay. Only to say that there have been places, particularly in Congo, where we've purposely not piloted or not done CLTS in that area. It was early on in our experience of doing CLTS there because of very recent subsidized approaches and actually things like cash for work approaches, even of beneficiaries on sanitation. So, looking at the sort of force diagram, there were so many things not to say this is going to be, you're just building up challenges to get a longer term outcome, good outcome of sanitation, safe sanitation use through CLTS in a place like this. So, but apart from that, Jamie, no, I would love to hear from anyone else who's got experience on that.
Another question is, what are the contexts where positive results can be achieved? And adding to that, when should we definitely not use a CLTS approach?
Right. So, well...
I want to break that down into two. Should we start with where do you see, what context do you see positive results? Where do you see where positive results can be achieved? And then we'll move, and then we'll move on to where should it definitely not be used.
Not be used. So okay, so positive results. If I think back to particularly our time in Afghanistan and the times we've used components of CLTS in North Kivu in Congo, I think what's really important is having that relationship with the beneficiary community, having that trust and that respect, that mutual respect, is really key. So that must be there. Even though we might have a dynamic local facilitator, it's not about just showing up. It's about knowing that community, knowing where they've come from, knowing where they are, particularly in the fragile states context, and gaining respect. And also convincing that community that we are there in the long term. So CLTS, particularly triggering, can happen in a very short time, but that we'll be there to see, to monitor, to add value to the campaign and to build on it. At the same time, of course, it's not sort of leading people by the hand. CLTS, in its success, is about pure facilitation, good facilitation. But I think it's that knowledge that we are not just visitors in and out. We're there because we're concerned, and we want people to reflect on their behaviours and to see change. I think just one way that we were able to help this along in North Kivu, Jamie, was we saw the need, certainly a fragile states context. Even the community in that area was actually almost surrounded by a national park where there was active militia going on, quite an insecure context, and encouraging people that getting on the sanitation ladder, even in a rudimentary way, seeing, for example, I've got a slide of the $6 latrine, was fine, was going to make that difference, and encouraging people that they didn't need to and couldn't afford or go out to get the materials for anything greater. And also in that context, people having difficulty with getting tools to dig latrines and so on. So setting up a tools bank and gaining trust to lend out tools and wheelbarrows and so on. And getting this dynamic going in the community, that we were there on their side, as it were.
Okay. And then are there any areas or contexts where the CLTS approach is definitely not a good way to go?
Well, you know, Jamie, as you asked that question, I wonder if, you know, asking that question even perhaps 2 years ago, you know, certainly you guys at IDS and other practitioners would know, we would have said that, hey, you know, fragile states, you know, can't be in there because, you know, people are just, you know, they're devastated, they've got nothing. Of course, we've got to be supply driven. And things have moved on. It's the same with the urban context. What we're learning now about the applicability and the modality of the urban context, where CLTS can work. I think areas where it can't, perhaps it comes back perhaps to some of the classic things, particularly the subsidy approach, where NGOs have, perhaps not just in WASH, but in other sectors, have been quite, you know, sort of ticking off these indicators, these targets on their log frame, and just delivering all sorts of materials, fulfilling bills of quantities and so on. You know, it just we can't say just don't go there. We need a different approach, but that's one of the least helpful areas. I think some of the physical situations as well. So it's not to say that we're like in the Nepal example, where where open defecation free is already accepted. Yeah, that's great to help people regain ODF. I think we need to be quite open about what we're using CLTS and its learning for, you know, to regain ODF, to get people to use latrines for the right reason, to encourage clean environments in a close living context like an IDP camp. So I think today there are far more areas where we may have said, you know, it's not applicable, where we can say, yeah, it's applicable. We just got to be aware of the conditions, and I think particularly the physical conditions as well. I'm thinking, Jamie, back to the handbook, and I remember, so I think it's page 14 and 15 in the original handbook. There's lots of unfavourable conditions for doing CLTS. They're there, and I actually, in my own sort of facilitation, I often use those pages as a sort of quiz to say, in these conditions, you know, not a lot of trees around, or women don't have much of a voice. You know, what makes a difficult or a conducive CLTS project? So I think to be aware of many of the physical elements, and again, that's not to say it can't work in unfavourable conditions. I think the trick is to be aware of what the conditions are, and if necessary, not to give a design post-triggering, but to sort of let the community be aware of the sort of environmental envelope within which CLTS can just blossom as the triggering would have it, and not creating issues where you don't need to create issues. So again, it's difficult to say in this context CLTS will not work. We're all on a learning curve on that.
Great, thanks for that. We have another question about how to ensure quality of technological options, especially in fragile states. Is there any experience that you have with that?
I think, you know, I rather imagine someone like Richard or Ritloff or Prasad would have a good input to that. So yeah, and you know, structural quality of latrines has been an issue in the past for CLTS, but in the Nepal example, we really strove to tie that in with building back better, more resilient, more appropriate structures that would give longevity to them and be safer. General, you know, it's not about giving the blueprint design. We all know from, you know, from the sort of classical writings on CLTS, that will stall the campaign, certainly for poorer people who, if they can't match a particular design or technique, they would think that that approach isn't for them. They can't afford it. They can't be part of it. So we're going to have to be flexible, and I think it's actually having that sort of feeding in ideas generically of useful and good materials, ways, techniques that are already known for homes but can be used in latrine building, rather than insisting or suggesting that this is the right way or this is the right way, unless latrines are going to be harmful, or could potentially be harmful. I just finally raised that example again, Jamie, of the vault latrine in Afghanistan. Our approach there was not to say don't do vault latrines. Actually, those of us participants wash trained now on this webinar will know that vault latrines, they're not great, are they? You know, you're handling uncomposted feces, so you know that's dangerous. But what we did, instead of changing or persuading to change design, we gave raised awareness of the harm through to the very thin soils and the steep slopes and the water course at the bottom of all of the sort of hamlets where we were doing the campaign, and instead looked at ways of sealing that vault, and also to put an emphasis on safe handling of the feces once they are taken off, and then put emphasis on hand washing, emphasis on intermediate pits for decomposting the human ore because it's a cold climate, rather than saying no, don't do this, do that because the conditions are unfavourable. I'll leave it there, Jamie.
Okay. And following on from that question, do you have any advice about ways to ensure quality of triggering and follow-up in similar situations? if we know that we need high quality triggering and consistent follow-up and able to ensure the gains that we reach, are there ways to monitor that in areas where it's not so accessible?
I'm reading deep into this question, Jamie, in terms of monitoring. I think that's really important, and generally, monitoring how well an action plan is adhered to is pretty key. We haven't really dwelt on that. No, I think only of the example in North Kivu, where again, because of relationships, because of having particularly hygiene and health-based staff who were from the same people group as the communities we were working with, complete trust, complete understanding, completely given and convincing to wanting to see transformation in that community. That was really key. I guess, Jamie, I'm often asked when by a partner or in a fragile states context, who have we got for training, for trainer of trainers in facilitation. And in a sense, I'm trying to keep a bit of a sort of register, a knowledge of who's out there ready to train of trains, be a trainer of trainers, and then to pass that on. How can we ensure that just as a sort of rapid response register, we've also got a very good trainer of trainers who can get out, who can help and actually see virtual piloting to a certain degree and mentor and help new facilitators get going. Apart from that, it's the relational thing as well as the quality and the trust. I think that is so key.
You also mentioned in your presentation the use of working with trusted local organizations.
Yeah.
I think helps answer that question.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Is there any more?
Not really. The idea that we don't come in isolation either, in terms of either the INGO or even the local NGO, now trained, even if well trained in CLTS facilitation. It's about working with existing structures, working with existing management or accountability groups in the community. Don't, I would say, don't start establishing or trying to establishing yet another accountability group, call it a water users committee or something different, when the context already has a group that could easily take on those responsibilities. And there might be more straightforward additions, such as and focuses such as encouraging, mentoring natural leaders instead. So it's not working in isolation, and the example I think was a good one where the group was using community health workers and that program, and in a sense piggybacking off the good respect and success that the health workers had and were already known in the community. So I think that was a very good example and very key, and something that would be quicker off the mark in a post-emergency or fragile states context.
That leads me very nicely into my next question, because someone was interested in the community health workers in Somalia. And you've mentioned religious groups. I wondered if there are any other community structures or groups of people who you would recommend involving in this process.
So, like I said, Jamie, as Tearfund, we are preferred, our niche in a sense. We love the grassrootsness of faith-based agencies, the fact that they've got, that longevity when everybody goes, when it disappears, when the operation's over, they stay. They're part of that same poor community who began the work anyway, and they're hardly going to demonstrate something that's inappropriate and probably not ultimately profit making and so on. So we see so many pluses for messaging, for demonstrating, for advocating of the faith-based type of bodies. And that's not just Christian, that's Muslim as well in the places we were, Pakistan, Sudan, Afghanistan, of course. You know, really important, very biblical. People go to, you know, at the end of the day, particularly after an emergency, you know, you've got strains of hope, and that is what faith-based agencies embody. So why aren't we using them? But besides that, and existing, certainly working with existing local or district level WASH department workers, heads, I think that's really key as well, getting them to buy in and to see the stages that you're reaching with the community, and to be ultimately supportive of the campaign, of the process. I think that's really, really key. We're missing a trick if we're not. Even in the training of trainer stages as well, by the way, we're not incorporating local WASH department workers. Yeah, of course, there's always problems with people moving on and so on, but it is a tripartite sort of approach, this, where ultimately, Tearfund anyway, we see in local government as the ultimate backstopping agency for long-term WASH.
Okay, thanks very much. We have a question from someone in Yemen who mentions that UNICEF were implementing CLTS prior to a crisis beginning, and then they continued to do it. I wonder if you had any experience of working in a similar situation.
No, Jamie. Yeah. Well, really, only in Nepal, and we're all on a learning curve there.
That's quite a different situation between Yemen and Nepal.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you know, but I think there's similarities as well. So, for example, what humanitarian actors, you know, if they're allowed in, what we can actually do, what will be endorsed as responsibilities that we can do. Clearly, as we've seen in Nepal, it's critical to work within what's been achieved and what people are used to doing. So I think that's really, really important. And can I just broaden that question very slightly, Jamie? Not just where, if I may, not just where total sanitation or community-led sanitation or the ODF policy is actually embedded in policy in that country, but where, for example, people are using used to using latrines anyway, middle-income countries. I'm thinking of, say, Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan. Our response there was very different to the examples even that I've been talking about and include in the booklet. And there our response is, again, to understand that people, they, for the most part, they know of the importance and of the connection of poor health and overall well-being with well-used and maintained sanitation facilities. It's a very transient situation, and our response there is a sort of moving feast response, where we're actually providing more prefab type latrines. We're actually encouraging people to take on the latrine themselves, and as they move, that they've got this the latrine with them. Many people, as you know, were displaced with vehicles and have that possibility. So I think in a middle-income sort of fragile context, it's a different approach again. It's thinking a little bit out the box. How in a situation where, you know, talking about or spending focus in a way that would be right in sub-Saharan Africa would not be right in Iraq. And certainly, if you like, putting the platform for ODF at a different level, and therefore seeing the program outputs perhaps even a completely different shape as we're trying in Iraq, and seeing some good results as people move on. They may leave the latrines to the next person or take them with them, and you know, that's something that is quite strange given some of the principles I've been talking about, but it works in that context.
So what you're saying is it's context specific based on the country and also the type of emergency.
Yeah, I would say absolutely, Jamie, and I think, and if I may say so, you know, working with the CLTS hub and coming along to the meetings and learning a lot from you guys, but I think that you and Peter and Robert and, you know, the fraternity, we'd agree that we're seeing learning and we're seeing more flexibility and adaptation of CLTS campaigns and the outcomes. And I think that's really great, that's really healthy, and we need to see more of it. Hopefully some of the case studies I've been talking about, it's not just learning, but hopefully it's encouragement for us as well to keep on sort of pushing the boundaries here. Where can we see this happening so that people in a much perhaps shorter period than we've accepted in the past, following particularly a natural disaster, can see this moving on, this building back, so we see less dependency in the long term, and even a sort of building back better and regaining good sanitation and hygiene outcomes.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions. One is on payment by results. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but Tearfund are part of the SWIFT consortium. That's
correct, yeah.
That have a payments by results contract in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in northern Kenya.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
How do you ensure sustainability and progress up the sanitation ladder within this program?
Okay, so that's a good question. So first of all, just quickly to say that our in Congo, actually, first of all, you know, we acknowledge, like I have been explaining, the government policy, particularly for rural sanitation area, which in DR Congo is a sort of hybrid of things, a sort of classification status, which the Congolese government call village école Asani, which in a nutshell is sort of village and school health. So we start off by saying, yeah, let's try and whatever sort of modalities we're using, we're feeding into this in the places where it's important to do so. We didn't use CLTS classically, a CLTS campaign. We certainly used components and many of the triggering activities, but and I think that's a good learning point. But and do you know, even if we call them triggering at times, we there were issues. We've wrestled with them. I think we were sharing perhaps about 18 months ago. I remember sharing the question. Okay, in a payment by results program, what is sufficient triggering? When is triggering enough? You know, when have you got enough people? What marks that? And it was you know, it's a question that seemed to go viral a bit really amongst practitioners. You know, to think, well, you know, that's interesting. How do we explore that? So I'm not coming to you with a packaged idea of how CLTS, in our experience, will work in PBR, but I will say, just like the slide that's up at the moment, you know, the great positive about this is in the SWIFT work and our PBR work now in Congo, we're in a 2-year period. We finish the outputs It's just about seeing sustainability. And unlike a gifted grant, in this case, we're going to be receiving or not payment on seeing that those sustainability outcomes. And so it's about now about the use of latrines that we've worked on. So we've been wrestling with appropriate sort of indicators, what that looks like, and really putting effort on monitoring and evaluation to see, even 2 years after the output, that we've got a defined, admittedly a defined percentage of ongoing sustainability of latrine use. So payment results has made us wrestle with what sustainability looks like, you know, some time after, way after triggering, way after latrine building has ended. So I think that's really important.
I would like to add to that quickly, because I think with payment by results, people are still trying to grapple with the idea of using it in CLTS programs when you're working in what one might call a normal circumstance. I wonder if there's any adaptations which you've had to make as it is being used in fragile states or post-emergency.
Okay, well, can I say on this one? I think I've not got this stuff in front of me, Jamie.
Okay.
But I do encourage. I would encourage participants to look at the SWIFT site, and there's a lot of learning up there on how both in Kenya, and in DRC, that we, as I say, we didn't use CLTS classically. But how we've used our learning in CLTS to gain, yes, indeed the outputs, but moreover the emphasis on the outcomes. So I think that's would be very good for participants to look into that.
And what's the website?
Yes, sorry, go on. No, go on.
What's the SWIFT website?
Right. Oh gosh, whatever. I haven't got it right in front of me. If you Google Swift WASH DRC, it'll get you there. Okay. And then we'll see some of the modalities that were used. And I'm not sure if it gets down to some of the details. So, for example, of percentages that were sort of acceptable to us, that were thresholds on seeing, for example, the number of people that we're working with, that we were triggering with. But do look at that site, because it gives a lot of information generally on our journey of PBR.
So someone very kindly entered the website into
the question
box. Yeah. And it's swift.
Thank you very much.
.org. So that's swift.org
okay,
for those who'd like to follow up on that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of other questions which are more concerned with CLTS more generally, which unfortunately I don't think we have time for. If there are any other questions concerned specifically for Frank and Frank's experience, please send them in. We have had a question on, which I think is more appropriate for me and the CLTS Knowledge Hub to answer. It's saying that there were excellent lessons identified within the various contexts, and given the relief to development continuum, DRR and Build Back Better, many are extremely relevant to broader development-based programming. And what is our plan to disseminate these lessons in the booklet in a way that reaches non-humanitarian implementing agencies and donors? So don't worry, Frank, I won't put that on you. But yes, I mean, our network is mainly WASH practitioners and those engaged in CLTS. If there's anyone you think should be reading this booklet, please let us know, and we'll be more than happy to send them hard copies or send them soft copies via email. As Frank mentioned, the booklet will be on our website immediately after this webinar, and this webinar will also be posted, a recording of this webinar will also be posted on the CLTS website and on the Susanna Forum and similar websites. So yeah. So no more questions have come through. I think it's a good time to give Frank a virtual round of applause from wherever you're sitting. I'm not sure how that works, but I'd like to thank Frank very much for taking the time to present. That's very kind of you, and I think we've all learned a lot. I'd also like to thank participants for joining in this webinar. If you do have any feedback or would like to share any other information with us, please visit our website and or send an email to clts@ids.ac.uk. That's clts@ids.ac.uk. Any questions that we can't answer, we'll forward on to Frank. And hopefully we can continue this conversation either on internet sites such as Susanna or other ways. But please, if you have any information, we are always happy to host things on our website regarding this. So let us know. Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
So Jamie, can I just say once again, thank you for participants and for the questions, and just to say to folk, we're on a learning curve. I'm such on a learning curve here. What we do is we believe in the demand-led, self-reflective approach. We see that has been so key as an overall approach of relief to development. So, we're into flexibility, trying new things, trying to persuade donors, we've done this pilot here, so let this happen there. So we'd love to hear of your experiences as well. And particularly with things like connections with cash programming, sanitation marketing, payment by results, multiple sectoral approaches. Please don't think that, with the booklet there, this is what we've done. It's what we're prepared to get on board about. It's what we recognize is important as the way ahead. So please do fill in on what you can teach us about your experience in these modalities. Thanks very much. Thanks, Jamie, Petra, and the team. Bless you, and see you hopefully at the next CLTS Hub meeting, whatever that will be.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.